The sacrifice of Abraham, unconditional love and faith in God. The journey of a father, Abraham, a figure that has become synonymous with faith and sacrifice, was no ordinary father. He was a man whose love for his son was boundless, yet whose faith in God was unwavering. His story, filled with pain but also filled with divine wonder, begins in a dry, barren land, a land that seemed to offer little hope. Abraham and his wife, Sarah, had been waiting for years for a child, but no child came. At this point, Abraham and Sarah were not young anymore. They had waited, hoping, praying, and watching the years pass, but still, no child. Then, at what seemed like the last possible moment, when all hope seemed to be extinguished, they were blessed with a gift beyond measure, Isaac, their son. Finally, after all those years of longing, Isaac was born, and Abraham could hardly contain his joy. The father who had waited so long now had his child, and with that child came joy, fulfillment, and purpose. But it was also at this moment of overwhelming joy that Abraham's greatest test began, the ultimate test. One day, when Isaac was still a young boy, God spoke to Abraham, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." Abraham's heart must have stopped in that moment. This was not just a request, it was an order, and one that seemed impossible. God was asking Abraham to do the unthinkable, to sacrifice his beloved son, the child of his old age, the child he had waited for all his life. But Abraham, a man of deep faith, did not question God. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. His trust in God was so profound that he didn't question God's will, no matter how painful or inexplicable it seemed. And so, without hesitation, Abraham prepared for the journey. The next morning, without a word of complaint, he gathered his son Isaac, took 2 servants, and set off toward Mount Moriah. Isaac, the innocent child, didn't yet understand what was happening. To him, it was just another journey with his father, a man he trusted completely. He had no idea that this would be the day when the very thing he loved most in this world would be put to the ultimate test, the moment of sacrifice. When they arrived at the foot of the mountain, Abraham began to prepare the altar. He built the altar, laid out the wood, and then looked at Isaac with a mixture of love and sorrow. Isaac looked up at his father with innocent eyes and asked, "Father, we have the wood and the fire, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham, with a heart breaking inside, responded, "God himself will provide the lamb, my son." And with that, Abraham bound Isaac and placed him on the altar. The boy, still trusting in his father, did not resist, but as Abraham stood above him, knife raised, ready to do the unthinkable, a voice from heaven stopped him. "Abraham, Abraham," the voice called, "do not lay a hand on the boy. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." At that moment, Abraham stopped. His heart raced, and tears filled his eyes. He looked around and saw a ram caught by its horns in a nearby thicket. God had provided a sacrifice in place of Isaac, and Abraham's son was spared. The lesson of unconditional love and faith. Abraham's story is not just a story of faith, it's a story of unconditional love. Abraham loved Isaac with all his heart, but his love for God was even greater. He didn't love Isaac less, he simply loved God more. His willingness to sacrifice his son was not a rejection of Isaac, but rather an expression of his absolute devotion to God. God did not ask for Isaac's life because he wanted to punish Abraham. Rather, God wanted to test Abraham's heart, to see whether his love for God surpassed all other things, even the most precious thing in his life. And Abraham proved that his faith was not conditional upon his own desires or comforts. His love for God was pure and absolute. And in the end, God honored his faith, redemption, and hope. Abraham's test is also a profound lesson in redemption. God did not want the death of Isaac. Rather, he wanted to see if Abraham's faith was true. By the time Abraham had raised his hand to sacrifice Isaac, his faith had been proven beyond measure. And in that moment, God provided a ram as a substitute offering, ensuring that Isaac's life was spared. This moment speaks volumes about the nature of God's love. While God may test us, He does not wish for our harm. When we demonstrate our faith, even in the darkest moments, God will provide. Abraham's faith was rewarded not with the loss of his son, but with God's blessing and assurance that Isaac would live, and that God would always be with Abraham. Sacrifice and unconditional love. Conclusion: sacrifice and unconditional love, a call for reflection. The story of Abraham and Isaac leaves us with an image that resonates far beyond ancient scriptures. It speaks to the heart of what it means to love unconditionally, to trust without reservation, and to follow God with unwavering faith. At the heart of this narrative lies a challenge to every person who reads or hears it. Can we, like Abraham, surrender the most precious parts of our lives to God? Can we trust Him enough to offer up what we hold dearest, even when it doesn't make sense, even when it hurts? Abraham's willingness to sacrifice Isaac was not just an act of obedience, it was an act of pure love. A love that was not contingent on God fulfilling His desires, but one that was anchored in deep trust and the belief that God's will, whatever it might be, was always for the greater good. In the heat of that moment, when Abraham raised the knife, he was not merely preparing for a tragedy, he was preparing to offer his heart, his deepest love for God. And in that moment, God did not take Isaac's life, but gave it back to Abraham, showing him that true faith is always reciprocated, though not always in ways we expect. This pivotal moment, when Abraham paused and God provided the ram, was not a simple act of divine intervention. It was the ultimate expression of God's love and grace. It reveals that God's plans are greater than our own, that He sees beyond our immediate pain and suffering, and that His love for us transcends even our understanding. God did not need Abraham's sacrifice. What He wanted was Abraham's heart, whole, devoted, and trusting. But let's pause and reflect. What does this mean for us today? We are not asked to sacrifice our children or offer up everything we love in such dramatic ways. Yet, every day, we face moments where we are asked to make choices that reflect our love for God and our trust in His plan. We are faced with moments of doubt, of fear, of uncertainty, where we must decide, will we trust God's direction, or will we cling to what is comfortable and familiar? Think of the small, everyday sacrifices we make, giving time to others when we would rather be doing something for ourselves, choosing to forgive when every ounce of our being wants to hold on to bitterness, offering love to those who seem unworthy of it. These daily acts of faith, though they may seem small, echo the same message Abraham conveyed, a love for God that says, "I trust you, no matter what." Abraham's story teaches us that faith is not about a blind following of rules or a quest to avoid hardship. It is about entering into a relationship with God that demands something from us. It calls for our deepest desires, our dreams, and our plans to be surrendered to Him, with the understanding that His plan is infinitely wiser than our own. It asks us to love God not for what He gives us, but for who He is. In today's world, this kind of faith is challenging. We live in a culture that teaches us to hold on to everything we possess, to control our own destiny, and to never let go of what we love. But Abraham's story flips this narrative on its head. It tells us that sometimes, letting go, whether it's of our pride, our material possessions, or our cherished plans, is the truest act of love and faith. It shows us that God does not ask for our sacrifice for His own gain. He asks for it because through sacrifice, we are shaped, molded, and drawn closer to His heart. Think about the times in your life when you have had to make difficult choices. Have there been moments where you felt God asking you to trust Him beyond your understanding? Moments when the right choice, though painful, brought a deeper sense of peace and fulfillment than you ever could have imagined? These moments, however small or large, mirror the essence of Abraham's test, his willingness to trust God's will above his own desires. The love Abraham demonstrated was not without its cost. It wasn't an easy love. It wasn't a love that came with immediate rewards or clear answers, but it was a love that transcended fear. And when God intervened to provide the ram, He showed Abraham and us that true faith often leads us to places where we are given more than we could have hoped for, and certainly more than we deserve. The beauty of this story lies in its complexity. God's command, which at first glance may seem cruel or senseless, ultimately reveals the depth of his compassion. It is not about punishing Abraham. It is about teaching him, and all of us, a fundamental truth that love, faith, and trust are intertwined in a way that transforms our hearts. Through the sacrifice of Isaac, Abraham came to understand that the greatest act of faith is not the one that is rewarded with material blessings, but the one that is marked by deep surrender and trust in God's greater plan. In many ways, the story of Abraham and Isaac is a mirror of our own spiritual journeys. We, too, are often called to step into the unknown, to make decisions that go against our instincts or desires, trusting that God's love for us will guide us. We are invited, just as Abraham was, to lay down our Isaacs, the things, relationships, and dreams that define us, and trust that God will provide. It may not always be easy, but it is in these moments of surrender that we often encounter the deepest sense of peace and connection to our Creator. At its core, this story calls us to examine our own hearts. What are we holding on to that we need to let go of? Are we willing to offer our most precious dreams to God, trusting that His love will always provide? Abraham's story reminds us that sacrifice is not about loss. It is about gaining something far greater. It is about entering into a deeper relationship with God, one built on trust, faith, and a love that is beyond measure. So, as you reflect on the story of Abraham, ask yourself, what would it look like for me to surrender to God completely, to trust Him with my most precious possessions, my hopes, and my future? The answer, though it may be difficult, will guide you into a deeper understanding of what it truly means to love God with all your heart, mind, and soul.